Hi, and welcome to the Caterpillar Cross Stitch YouTube channel. My name's Ford from Son of a Stitch, and this week's video is part one of a two-part series where I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about Biscornu. Here at Caterpillar Cross Stitch, we are all about cross stitch, and we upload helpful and, we like to think, entertaining videos about it every single week. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of those videos. And if you like this episode in particular, make sure to give it a like and leave me a comment down below. Likewise, if you have something that you'd like to see me cover on the channel, leave that in the comments as well, and I'll add it to my list of ideas. Maybe you'll get your question answered right here on the Caterpillar Cross Stitch YouTube channel. And before we get started, I want to take just a moment to remind you to join the Caterpillar Cross Stitch VIP Stitch Club. When you join, you'll get 10% off your first order, you'll get an ebook with 8 free digital cross-stitch patterns in it, and you'll get a download of our top 10 cross-stitching tips. So make sure you hit the link down there in the description so that you can sign up for all of those great perks. I made a video a little while ago about how to get your stitchy bug back. That is, how to get back into the practice and habit of stitching. And one of the things that I mentioned was that I had made a Biscornu, and that new and interesting thing to do with cross-stitching had really reignited my passion for the craft. And I got a question from a handful of people that maybe I should have foreseen, and that is, what the heck is a Biscornu? So let me show you the one that I made. This is a design that I created based on some of my favorite retro 8-bit video games, and you can see it's an interesting little object. Let's take a closer look at it. So this is a Biscornu. You can see that from the top, it kind of looks octagonal. You can see 8 flat sides. But it's a shape that's made by sewing 2 square pieces of fabric to one another at a 45-degree offset, so that the corner of one square of fabric attaches to the middle of the side of another square of fabric, and that's what gives it that shape. It's technically known as a flattened square antiprism. Traditionally, they have a button sewn in the middle to kind of give this sort of pillowy effect. And really, it has 10 sides. You have 2 square sides, and then 10 isosceles right triangles, which creates a very cute little shape and a lot of opportunities for really interesting decorations. This is one that I made as a tribute to all my favorite vintage 8-bit video games. Now in the next video, I'm going to teach you how to assemble a Biscornu. But before we get to that, we need to choose the correct project materials and processes to make it so that we can do that and have it come out as good as it can. So let's go over those things first. The first thing we need to think about is our pattern. A Biscornu, since it is made, as I mentioned, from 2 squares sewn together, needs to start with a square pattern. I recommend something around 3 inches square. So on 14 count, we want around 50 by 50 stitches. That'll give us the size that we need in order for the Biscornu shape and geometry to work correctly. I also suggest, especially if this is your first Biscornu project, to make sure that your pattern has an even number of stitches. Since we need to line the corner of one square up with the middle of the side of another square, it's better if it's even, because then that middle isn't in the middle of a stitch. It's between 2 stitches. It just makes it easier to count and position it. Also, since we're making 2 squares, obviously you're going to need 2 patterns. You can just make the same pattern twice and sew those 2 pieces together. It just means that the 2 sides of your Biscornu will be the same. And if you're going to do the traditional button in the middle, you also want there to be no important figures or empty space in the middle of both patterns. Now, because we need our project to wind up not only with the same number of stitches in height and width, but actually the same size in height and width, we need to make sure that the fabric that we're going to use for it is nice and square. Sometimes fabric that's been post-processed, such as hand-dyed fabric, or often inexpensive cross-stitching fabric, especially the store brands that you'll get at some big box craft stores, will not be quite even. That's part of why they're less expensive, is because they have lower quality control. So we need to make sure that our fabric count is exactly the same in both directions, or as near to it as possible. Let me show you how to do that. Alright, so to check whether our fabric is square, all we're going to do is count the number of threads in each direction. because that'll tell us how many stitches per inch we're going to make. So all we got to do is take our ruler, line it up with the weave of the fabric, put the 0 mark here at a hole, that lined up just right, and then count how many threads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, almost exactly, threads per inch. That 14th one just goes a tiny bit over that inch mark. So we know it's 14 threads per inch this way. So what we want to do is turn the fabric or turn the ruler. This is easier for you to see if I turn the fabric, so that's what I'm going to do. And then do the same thing in the other direction. Line the ruler up with the weave of the fabric, line the 0 mark up with one of the holes, and count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We're going to get 13 stitches per inch in this direction. Now it doesn't seem like that big of a difference, 13 versus 14, but if our pattern is 50 stitches wide, then that winds up with an error of 3 stitches over the course of it. That means that the difference between the width of one square and the width of the other will be the same as 3 stitches. It's nearly a 1/4 of an inch. So that can make a really big difference when trying to assemble your Biscornu. So let's find a piece of fabric that is square. If we do the same thing here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 this direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 13 this direction as well. So this was actually marketed as 14 count fabric, which means it's not quite accurately labeled, but at least it's the same in each direction. So if I use the same fabric for both pieces of my Biscornu, they will at least be the same size and they'll be square.
Now, I love making these videos for Caterpillar Cross Stitch. I really enjoy sharing my knowledge with the world. But I'm just one guy and I can only make one video a week, so a lot of times I can't get to every question, and sometimes you need an answer to something faster than I might be able to help you with it. That's where the Caterpillar Cross Stitch social media accounts come in. I strongly recommend that you join the Caterpillar Cross Stitch Facebook group and subscribe to the Caterpillar Cross Stitch Instagram feed. There's a tremendous community that's grown up around those two profiles, and especially the Facebook group has 18,000 members in it, which is hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated cross-stitch knowledge and experience. So if you have a question that you need answered, or if you need a project idea, or just to be reassured that your project is going to turn out okay, it's a really great place to go and be around other stitchers and to absorb the knowledge of people who may have more experience. So I strongly recommend checking both of those out. Now, a Biscornu stitch pattern is always going to have a backstitch line that runs around the outside edge of the border. That is not decorative, that's actually how we're going to be attaching the two squares. So since we are going to be using that to bind these two squares together, we need to have a consistent direction of pressure and tension on that. So I suggest using a true backstitch and using 2 strands. So let me show you what I mean by a true backstitch.
So when I say we're going to do a true backstitch, what I mean by that is that each stitch will move backwards relative to the direction that you are extending the line. So each stitch is going to come up a little farther along and then go back. That does mean that on the bottom, each stitch is 2 stitches long. So essentially we're doing 2 stitches forward on the back and 1 stitch back on the front. This means that each stitch will have the same direction and the same tension, and when you pull on it to lash those 2 pieces of fabric together, you won't get bubbling or warping or anything like that. You'll have a nice consistent direction for that.
Now, when I'm stitching a project like this, I like to save fabric and save time and effort by stitching them together on the same piece of fabric at once, rather than cutting out 2 pieces of fabric. If you're going to do that, you want to make sure that you leave an inch of space between the 2 square patterns that you're stitching on your piece of fabric. because we're going to need 1/2 inch on each one for a seam allowance. So when we cut them apart, we need there to be 1/2 inch left on each one of those on all 4 sides. So leave an inch of space between the 2 squares if you stitch them on the same piece of fabric at one time.
So these are the 2 halves of the Biscornu that I'm going to show you how to assemble in the next episode. You can see I've stitched them together on a single piece of fabric just to save on fabric and to make it easier to do. But because when I cut them out, I'm going to leave 1/2 inch of fabric all the way around, and I'll show you that next time. I needed to make sure to leave at least an inch of fabric in between them so that when I come out that 1/2 inch, there's enough space to do it.
Well, now that we've learned a little bit about Biscornus, and I've hopefully given you some advice to help set you up for success on a Biscornu project, next week I'm going to teach you how to assemble the Biscornu. I found it a very satisfying and surprisingly easy process, so make sure that you come back next week for that. Subscribe to the channel and hit the little bell notification icon so that you don't miss when that video comes out. Thank you so much for watching. For Caterpillar Cross Stitch, my name is Ford, and I will see you next time.